مشاهدينا مرحبا بكم في حوارات السياق. انتهى الأسبوع الثاني من القتال بين القوات المسلحة السودانية وخصومها في قوات الدعم السريع، وحتى الآن لم يسر الصراع كما توقع الفصيلان، إذ استولت قوات الدعم السريع على بعض الأهداف المهمة في اليوم الأول للقتال، لكنها لم تستطع توسيع مناطق سيطرتها بعد ذلك. هذه هي المقدمة، هي جزء من مقال كتبه ضيفنا أمس الأول وهو معنا الآن لمتابعة التطورات في السودان. نرحب بالأستاذ ألبرتو فرنانديز، وهو دبلوماسي والقائم بأعمال السفارة الأمريكية السابق في الخرطوم. سيد ألبرتو، مرحبا بك معنا.
Thank you.
الممثل الخاص للأمم المتحدة في السودان قال إن الخصمين المتحاربين اتفقا على إرسال ممثلين لهما في المفاوضات التي يعتقد أنها ستعقد في السعودية. ما فرص هذه المباحثات؟
Well, I think the idea of peace talks is a good idea, and I think we should congratulate or thank Saudi Arabia for trying to arrange these talks. But the problem is the fighting continues on the ground between the two armed factions. They're still fighting in Khartoum right now as we speak. There's fighting at the presidential palace between the two forces. So in principle, the idea of peace talks is a great idea, but the reality on the ground is a different one than that of peace talks.
هذا يدفعني إلى سؤالك، كيف هو المشهد الميداني الآن؟ من يسيطر على ماذا؟
That's an excellent question. I would say, in general, the army has the upper hand. However, the rapid support forces are still in Khartoum. They are still in Khartoum in great force. They have not been moved from certain strategic positions at the presidential palace, at the broadcasting center, near the airport, in certain populated areas. So it's a very difficult situation because it's what you have in Khartoum is kind of a stalemate between the two sides. If you look at the big picture, you could say the army controls more than the rapid support controls more, but it's neither side has defeated the other one completely.
خط المواجهات الحالي سيقود البلاد والجنرالين إلى أي وجهة؟
Well, I think that there's a discourse that is about what you mentioned about peace talks and about the international community finding negotiations or some kind of deal. And then the reality on the ground, which is that it's two generals and two military forces that want to destroy the other, that want to eliminate the other. And if you look at the rhetoric coming, especially from the army, the rhetoric, the narrative coming from the army is very much about eliminating the other. And you see supporters of the army who are often connected to the former regime, the regime of the dictator Bashir, or connected to various Islamist parties cheering on the army, that they want to destroy completely the rapid support forces.
هل سيناريو عودة نظام البشير قائم؟
Yes, I mean, what I described was a kind of Bashir 2.0, meaning that I don't think that the old men of the dictator are going to return. They're old and they're yesterday's men. But what you could see is a type of, Bashir regime light, or Bashir regime with a light civilian cover, a kind of step-by-step Islamization of going back to the days of the Bashir regime. We know that in the army, there are several trends. There are maybe nationalist trends, but there are also Ikhwanji trends that exist in the army until now. They're still there. So the big question, of course, in Sudan is from the outside, we see these two forces, but there are interests and organizations and individuals behind both of them. And in the case of the army, we know that there's no doubt about it, that the partisans of the former regime, that Islamists, that extremists who live in exile in Turkey are connected to the army side. And that is a big concern.
لأفهم منك فقط، وكأنك تخبرني أن مصر التي حظرت تنظيم الإخوان على أراضيها هي الآن تدعمهم في السودان.
Well, this is the crazy thing, isn't it? I think that I've written about this as well, because from the surface it doesn't make any sense. However, the question is, who are the Egyptians talking to, and what are they being told? If the Egyptians are talking to generals in the army who tell them, we are nationalists, we are not going back to the former regime, we're different, we overthrew the former regime, we're like you, the government in Egypt, they might believe that. But then you listen to the people of the former regime and they're all applauding the army. They're all encouraging the army. So you have this essential contradiction. That's what I say is the question is, who is actually in charge when it comes to the army faction? That's not at all clear. Until now, it's not clear.
بما أننا نتحدث عن مصر، هل تعتقد أن دول جوار السودان ستنخرط في مرحلة ما بطريقة أو بأخرى في الصراع؟
Well, that's certainly possible, but we first have to recognize this is a Sudanese conflict. It's a struggle for power between two generals and two institutions, two military institutions who are different in their history, in their geographic origin, in their ethnic origin. And it's a struggle between two mafias, two militias struggling for power over who's going to rule Sudan. So first of all, is a Sudan issue. Yes, there is the foreign hand, as we say in Arabic, al-yad al-makhfi al-ajnabi, but that's secondary to the struggle inside Sudan. The neighbors certainly do not want, the countries that neighbor Sudan do not want instability inside Sudan, because that could lead to refugees, it could lead to war. But they all have, of course, a complicated history with Sudan. They have either been enemies of Sudan, or there are refugees from that country in Sudan. So you have Ethiopia and Sudan as adversaries. You have Eritrean refugees in Sudan. You have Chad. You have Sudanese in Chad, and you have Chadians in Sudan. You have Sudanese who fought in Libya. So it's a real complicated situation. The important thing is to stop the fighting. That's the most important thing, obviously, for the international community.
سميت طرفي النزاع بالمافيا وكأنك تساوي بينهما، هذا ما يدفعني لسؤالك: من منهما أقرب للديمقراطية والنخبة المدنية؟
Well, I would say that neither one of them are Democrats. Neither one of them have clean hands. In Sudan, you see some of the rhetorics. They talk about that the army is a military institution, as opposed to the rapid support, which is some kind of militia. But that's kind of a dishonest comparison, because the army has functioned for much of its history like a sectarian and ethnic militia. All of Sudan's generals have come from the army. The army has a commercial economic empire separate from the state. The army has immunity from many civilian oversights. So that's why I say the army and the rapid support are more alike than they are different. The army represents the elite that has ruled Sudan since its inception, since January 1st, 1956. The rapid support are, to be honest, I mean, they have You know, there are elements within it that are bandits, that are thieves, that are, not good people, but they are the underclass. You know, why were they created? They were created because Khartoum, those who had power, wanted people they could use in a cheap way against their enemies. First in the 1980s, this began in the 1980s with the raising of militias among tribes, among Arab tribes, to use against the people in the south, in South Sudan, to kill them, to steal their cattle, to take their women. Khartoum came up with this idea. It was Hemeti did not come up with this idea. The Janjaweed did not come up with the idea. They are the tool used by Khartoum to control the regions. That's the history of it. So, you could say the army represents the establishment that has always held power. And then the rapid support is this poorly disciplined shock troops from the marginalized areas, right? From the countryside, from Bedouin and tribal people that were used to fight an insurgency.
وكأنك تخبرني أن السودانيين أمام خيارين أحلاهما مر.
Well, I would say neither is a good choice. I mean, this is the problem. Is what you need is there's a problem of military institutions in Sudan. Whatever that military institution is, there's a problem. And the military is not subordinate to civilian control. That's the heart of the matter. The question is, how do you get from here to there? Obviously, the perfect scenario is an end to the fighting and military institutions withdraw from political life and are only concerned with military issues, and there's elected civilian government over the military. That's the solution. The problem is, the devil is in the details. How do we get from here, from today, to that solution? That's the problem.
دعني أخبرك، لماذا لا يتم فرض ضغوط وعقوبات على الجنرالين؟
I think that would have been an excellent idea. It should have been done in 2021. It wasn't done. So the problem today with sanctions, I support them. I think that the generals should be sanctioned. However, there's a problem. The sanctions work slowly. And sanctions require time, they require patience. Situation in Sudan is deteriorating right now. So by all means, sanction the generals. But, the Sudanese people need help right now. A humanitarian crisis is happening right now. So sanctions are a weapon to be used, but they're not a quick solution. And that's the problem that we face right now.
وهنا ما الذي يمكن فعله؟
Well, you do what the Saudis and others have been suggesting. You encourage them to talk. You try to bring a ceasefire. You do what I wrote in my article in Al-Majalla. You make sure that the Islamists, that is a red line of the international community, that the Islamists cannot take power again through military means, so that is a red line of countries that are concerned with Sudan. And you move quickly. You try to move quickly towards a civilian solution, because both of these military institutions are deformed. As John Garang said, they're too deformed to be reformed many, many, many years ago. And so the best way is to go forward, is to have civilian control of the country, elected civilian control. Foreigners, the international community, tried to come up with this slow process of leading to transition to democracy. I don't think we can afford a slow process. because that leaves the generals in charge during that slow process.
هناك أيضا نقطة إشراك النخبة المدنية في أي مفاوضات وعدم وضعها في الكراسي الخلفية.
Well, I would prefer listening to the people on the street who are demonstrating against the military dictatorship than the generals. Absolutely. And I think one of the many criticisms that can be made of the international mediation is that they focus too much on the generals and not enough on the civilian, component of the situation. But it's late. It's very late, and right now the important thing is to stop the bleeding, the suffering of the Sudanese people, and to try to get the men with the guns away from power. That's not going to be easy to do, because the winner, or the side that thinks he's the winner, whoever that is, and it could be the army, is going to wrap itself in the flag, wrap itself in the nation, Jaish Wahed, Shab Wahed, for example, right? That means the army is the state, and that gives them an excuse to rule, to do whatever they want.
سؤالي الأخير عن الولايات المتحدة، موقفها من التطورات الأخيرة في السودان، لأنه يبدو ضبابيا حتى الآن.
Well, I think, first of all, what's happened in Sudan is a disaster, which the United States has a role in the disaster that happened. It's not the principal role. The principal role, as I said, is the two generals, the two military parties. But the Americans have a role in the disaster. The Americans didn't do anything after the military coup of October 25th, 2021. They didn't sanction the generals. That was the time to do it. The Americans thought that they had all this time to arrange things, when actually after Abdullah Hamdok, after the prime minister was overthrown by the army, that accentuated the competition between the two military sides. And so the Americans were slow. The Americans didn't do anything. They didn't pay enough attention to the situation in Sudan, I think, and they deserve part of the blame. Now, today, the Americans are talking to both sides. I personally think the Americans lean towards the army, like the Egyptians, because they prefer kind of, established institutions, and also because the Americans are obsessed with Russia. And somehow they think rapid support is Wagner. The reality is that the Russians support both sides. The Russians have good relations with the army, and the Russians have good relations with the rapid support. But I think the Americans, once again, have a kind of superficial view of the situation. But like I said, this is a problem that is easier to fix before it became a problem, right? So now we're in the situation where we need to stop the fighting for the sake of the Sudanese people, and then try to find some kind of political solution. Not easy.
أستاذ ألبرتو فرنانديز، شكرا جزيلا لك للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Thank you.
مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.